guys ready?
Sure.
All right.
Good. No, it's not even afternoon yet. Still, good late morning, Democrats. Welcome. Our time at this summit is wrapping up, but we still have one very exciting program for you if you can find your seats and quiet down. So you all know how lucky we are to have our Secretary of State, Tobias read. And he has invited some of his friends and colleagues from across the country to come join us today to talk about protecting democracy. So we are fortunate to be joined by Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, and our moderator for today's discussion, the Executive Director of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State, Ariel Hayes. So I'm going to turn it over to them to get the discussion started, and I'll see you all on the back end.
Thanks, everyone. We're so excited to be here with you today, and thanks to the Oregon Democratic Party and our host, Secretary Reed, for having us out-of-staters here. My name is Ariel Hayes, and I have what I sometimes, like someone told me last night, and I'm going to steal this because it's so good, the coolest job that you've maybe never heard of, which I get to run the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State and work with all these lovely folks, which means we provide support to all of our Democratic secretaries across the country. And we have a real doozy of set of elections that are up in 2026, and we're going to be talking about protecting democracy. And so without further ado, I want to dive in and allow our secretaries to introduce themselves, starting with Secretary Fontes.
Thank you very much, Ariel. Good morning, everyone. Did you guys have a great time at the dinner last night? I'll tell you what, that was...
How about Anderson Clayton?
Great. Anderson Clayton, is she here today? She's probably not. She wore herself out with that amazing speech. I've been to a ton of those sorts of dinners, and I will tell you right now, the one that you all put on here last night was one of the best ones I've ever seen, if not the best. So thank you for having me for that. It was great. All the speeches were awesome. And, well, look, I come from Arizona. I'm a born and raised Arizona native. My family's been in the Sonoran Desert since well before the 1690s, and back in the days when history was just orally passed down. I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. I'm an attorney by trade. Semper Fi, any Marines out there, and all the rest of you veterans too. Want to make sure that folks understand, I didn't get into politics because I wanted to be a politician. I got into politics because I was pissed off. And I don't know how many of you remember Maricopa County 2016, the presidential preference election, 4 and 5 hour long lines. I'm the guy that woke up the next day and decided that the person at the county recorder's office in Maricopa who was doing the job needed to be doing another job. I ran against her where no Democrat had ever challenged her in 28 years, and we won. And we won. And one last thing. Here's why it matters to run in those places where you don't think you can win. Between 2016 and 2020, my first and only term, because I lost my re-election bid then, Maricopa County went from just over 2 million voters to 2.5 million voters. Think about the math there. In just 4 years, Joe Biden won Maricopa County in 2020 by 40,000 votes. He lost the rest of the state by 30. Arizona turned blue in 2020 because we registered voters, we fixed the disenfranchisement problem, and we made it easy and secure for Arizona's elections to move forward. So I'm still fighting that fight now as Secretary of State. I'll go ahead and pass it over to my friend, colleague. She's just a genius, fellow warrior, and can I say it? Okay. We're hoping that she can be the next governor of the great state of Michigan, Jocelyn Benson.
Thank you. I'll turn this on. There we go. Thank you, Adrian, and thank you all Thank you, Tobias, for inviting us all here today. It's so beautiful to be here in Oregon with all of you at this critical moment for our democracy in this nation, where states that have always been the laboratories of democracy, secretaries of state who have always been the champions of democracy, in no other place here than in Oregon, which is the origin of voting by mail, which now has spread across the nation. The story of Michigan's democracy as well is one of both incredible resilience and growth, even in this challenging time. So I started my career at the Southern Poverty Law Center, investigating hate groups and hate crimes around the country. And it was really there, being in Selma, where I was instilled, this was probably about 30 years ago, with a deep sense of responsibility that we all have to carry forth the work of those who've come before us, the freedom fighters who marched and bled and fought so that we could ensure here in our country we lived up to those ideals in our Constitution of one person, one vote, and freedom for all, recognizing that the foundation of achieving anything, and I know you've all talked about incredible issues over the last day and a half, from workplace safety to economic growth and fair and equitable education to affordable and accessible health care. It all begins and ends with access to the ballot box, right? And so our work as Secretaries of State is to ensure that foundation, that access is real. But we do it in furtherance of those who've come before us and fought to make those rights real. And you know, shortly after my time in Alabama, the 2000 election happened. And we saw there how one person, remember that? I know it was 25 years ago, but Katherine Harris, ring a bell? One person, a Secretary of State, blocked a recount from happening, which impacted the outcome of an entire presidential election. So after that, I actually wrote a book on Secretaries of State. I went around the country and interviewed every single one, including Secretary Brown. That was who she was, Kate Brown at the time, before she became Governor Brown. What I saw was that every day, Secretaries of State show up along with our local election officials in Maricopa County and Wayne County and Detroit and elsewhere, and just make sure in a professional, nonpartisan way that your voice can be heard, that your vote is counted, and that you can trust the results of the election to be an accurate reflection of the will of the people. So when I ran and was elected in 2018, little did I believe that we would be facing what was truly in 2020, an unprecedented coordinated attack on that basic foundation, where Secretaries of State were called upon not just to protect and expand democracy, which I'm very proud we did in Michigan, through initiatives that, among other things, created vote by mail in our state, taking a page out of your playbook and bringing it to Michigan, election day registration, early voting, citizen-led initiatives put citizens in charge of our districts, ending gerrymandering in Michigan in 2018. So I was elected in that wave as the chief election officer, and then hit 2020, which wasn't just a year of a pandemic, but it was a year of an unprecedented effort by the then and now President of the United States to discredit, threaten, and undermine not just election officials, but voters in trying to participate in a fair and free election. And it's not lost on me that though we all fought to make sure that election held, I mean, people came to my home with guns, outside my home, and marched and called me a traitor. I huddled inside with my 4-year-old little boy, trying to run the bathwater loudly so that he couldn't hear the people shouting into bullhorns, and trying to stay calm while also thinking, what was going to happen? Was there a bullet going to fly through our window? For 45 minutes, all that stood in that night, which was in December of 2020, all that stood between my family and the growing armed protester outside our home was one single neighborhood security guard for 45 minutes. And that story, though it defined that year for us, it was not the only story of election officials being attacked. And in that moment, in that night, I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. But then something happened, in that I realized that this is indeed what sometimes is required to defend democracy. This is indeed sometimes what the country calls upon us to do to ensure that that foundation of democracy remains secure for all. I thought of John Lewis and those brave men and women who stood at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in March of 1965 and marched forward into a sea of Alabama state troopers, unafraid because they believed in the power of the vote and the critical role that we as citizens play in protecting that vote. And in that moment, I realized that I was not defending my family that night, though I was actually defending the will of the people, millions of voters in Michigan who voted in that presidential election and deserved to have their vote count, their voice heard, and that election hold. And in that moment, I knew I would stand up to anyone, anytime, anywhere who would ever try to threaten our rights and our freedoms. Because that's not just who I am. But listen, that's not just who I am. That's who we all are. That's who we all must be in this moment, in the states, standing to defend and protect your rights and freedoms. You know this firsthand, because Oregon is not immune from these challenges. And I know Secretary Reed's going to talk about that. But the bottom line is this. In this moment, we all have to be standing at the foot of that metaphorical Edmund Pettus Bridge together. Because the attacks on our democracy did not end in 2020. They actually just began in a real way that we are still fighting in an escalated way today. And so yeah, I'm running for governor in Michigan because I believe governors are also the firewalls for our rights and freedoms in this moment. We are the protectors as the secretaries of state and as the attorney generals, as state officials must be, of our rights, our freedoms, our economy, our healthcare, our education system, our entire beings and way of life in our states and in our country. We are the ones, you are the ones, who can help everyone see that the power of the people must always be greater than the people in power when we choose to harness it. And as secretaries of state, we're proud to stand and defend your ability to show the country your true power as people, as in citizens in this democracy. Thanks.
See why we introduced them and invited them? I don't think there's much for me to add. You already know me, but I will tell one story about how accommodating and nice Secretary Benson is. Secretary Fontes is too, but you've seen his style too. We have a lot of stories I could tell about him, but the one I want to share with you briefly, I was a rookie candidate for Secretary of State, and so I knew Secretary Fontes well enough that we'd been talking, but I didn't know Secretary Benson, so I decided to call her and ask her some advice. And so she kindly answered the phone, and I said, well, I'm State Treasurer, I'm running for Secretary of State, and I just wondered if you have any advice for me. She already mentioned part of this. So there's this long pause, and she says, well, you know I wrote a book on Secretary of State? I said, oh, of course, I have it on the way, as I clicked over to try and get it there. It's a very helpful academic book, but she's long been a mentor and a model. So I'm glad you're both here.
Thanks for having us. Thank you. Team Democracy.
Well, thank you to all the secretaries, and we're going to dive into some questions. And one of the themes that you'll hear about today is sort of the specific moment that we are in with the administration's overreach, and particularly how it pertains to elections and how it pertains to the critical work that our secretaries are doing. So, Secretary Reed, you're one of several states that's suing the Trump administration over their executive orders on elections. And can you talk a little bit about, if this executive order were upheld, how it would affect elections in a universal vote-by-mail state like Oregon? As Secretary Benson mentioned, like, you all have led the way here on universal vote-by-mail, and I want to make sure that people understand sort of what a big deal this is and what a threat it is.
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and I recognize here that I am the one Secretary of State on stage who is not a lawyer, so these two definitely will have things to add to this. The first thing I think is really to keep in mind what this executive order represents, which is an attempt to gut what the Constitution says is a state's responsibility. It's Article 1, Section 4. States run elections, not presidents. And so the very intention, before we get to any substance or the substantive effect, is to take that away and centralize it. That's cause for concern. Second, I think the fact that it's attempting to do that by executive order as opposed to by passing a bill. Congress does have a role, as we've seen it used in good ways, the Voting Rights Act and various other things. But to try and do this by executive order is further concern in the autocratic tendencies that this administration has. And then we get to the actual effect, because yes, I hope you are as proud as I am of the fact that Oregon was the first state to conduct all our elections by mail. Some of you are wearing these buttons that we're passing out. I love vote by mail. We have amongst the highest turnouts in the country. We have low cost, we have high security. These are all things that we should be proud of and should be working to share across the states. So I think the best way to think about the actual effect is to think about a person. Imagine the single mom who lives in Enterprise, for example. If we're talking about an in-person election that's going to happen in the fall, this is Oregon, Eastern Oregon. It's maybe not the safest, easiest thing to get to a spot. The roads might be icy, for example. Oh, she has to take some time off her job. She might be working 2 jobs right now. She might have to get a babysitter. None of these things should stand in the way of a person's fundamental American right to vote and hold politicians accountable. You shouldn't have to depend on your ability to afford it or fit it into your schedule to vote. So this is why we vote by mail in Oregon, because it works and it meets people where they are. They can vote in their living rooms, around their kitchen tables. And anything that has an effect to move us away from that is not something we should accept. It's really hard to overstate how ridiculous it is on a substantive and a strategic kind of approach. So we are one of several states that is challenging that executive order. And when the president talks about other executive orders, we may get to that. You can rest assured we will challenge those as well.
Continuing on a theme here, Secretary Benson, you are one of a number of states that is being sued by the Trump's Department of Justice for refusing to turn over voter data. And this is one of the things that I think is a story that, like many things that are happening right now, that hasn't gotten sufficient attention. And it hasn't, there are a lot of people that don't really haven't heard about this, don't understand why this is such a big deal. And can you talk a little bit about this issue and sort of what you're doing in Michigan specifically to fight back against these requests and this executive overreach?
Yeah, I told them no. You can't have our private citizens' data. There are laws that say you can't. It's not just me, right? And so we wrote, but they were like pen pals. So Penn Justice Department wrote us and was like, hey, we'd love all your private data. And then I wrote back and said no. But because the law doesn't say you can ask for that, Justice Department. But the essence of it is I think twofold. One, why? Do they want the social security numbers, driver's license data, voting history, addresses, phone numbers, all email addresses? Why do they want all that data? What are they going to do with it? And, well, I believe the best predictor of the future is the past. When they don't tell you what they're going to do with it, let's look what they've done with other data. And we've seen tech billionaires get access to data, right, that they shouldn't have access to. We've seen it get out of hands. They actually have asked us to upload the data into an unsecure cloud-based link that is really amateurish and it's sort of striking. And so they've given us no assurances, number one, that the data won't end up in the wrong hands, non-governmental hands, that would do perhaps untoward things with it. They've given us no assurances that they won't use that data to sort of fuel unlawful deportations or other things that that this administration is engaged in. We've just gotten no clarity, no answer. And that is suspicious enough to not provide any sort of government interest, any sort of compelling government interest that would suggest we should ignore what the law very clearly says in terms of our duty to protect that data. And it's another example of how secretaries of state are called upon in this moment to stand in the breach, to stand guard. And we have to elect secretaries in every state in the country, Democrats and Republicans, who will do just that, because we are facing a federal overreach that is still unfolding in terms of what that overreach is going to do. And then the last thing I'll mention on all of these things is, well, you're right, we haven't gotten a lot of coverage on this beyond, I think, the lawsuits and a few other things. What there has been a lot of fear, and I imagine a lot of you are feeling this or hear this, I hear it all across Michigan, is fears as to whether or not we're going to have a free and fair election in the future. And so when there are signs like this that are very odd and suggest perhaps that they could be laying the groundwork and to allow perhaps a federalization or troop deployment or other sorts of things that would interfere with free and fair elections, it's all the more important for us to see that and stand guard now, so that what they're asking to and the actions they're taking can't be used to enable federalization of elections or other things that would stand in the way of free and fair elections in the future.
Secretary Fontes, we've been talking a lot about federal interference in elections, but you've also had like some state and local officials in Arizona who are trying to change.
We have? It's news to me.
No, everyone you deal with there is totally rational. And
We put the AZ in crazy.
but I'm wondering if you can talk about coming from the uniquely positioned state that Arizona is, of being very purple and some of the unique challenges that you deal with there, the importance of having a strong Secretary of State in face of some of these local and state-based challenges that you face.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, the critical component isn't just strength, it's got to be strength from the right perspective. You know, we've had strong politicians do the wrong things, and in those circumstances, being strong might not be so super great. What we have in Arizona, I think, with me, and I know Michigan's got it, Oregon's got it, there are several other states that have strong secretaries of state right now who I'm very proud to be considered among, are folks who are pushing back against this federal authority that's really trying hard. But then at the local level, we also have to stand up, particularly in Arizona. In 2022, when we swept the top 3 elected offices, we were only 1 seat away from a tie in the state Senate and 1 seat away from a tie in the state House. We were close. Now, 24, we lost 1 in the Senate, so we're down 2. We lost 2 in the House, so we're down a couple. And these folks in Arizona is unique. Turning Point USA is actually headquartered in Phoenix. So they are our neighbors, they are our voters, but they have this broad national network that supports their kind of faction of the Republican Party in the legislature. And the attacks against our voting systems, the attacks against our voters, the attacks against access and justice are constant. And so, you know, it doesn't take a lot of brains to see. We've got to have somebody who's going to stand up and be the bulwark against not just the hard fights, but the little corrosive bits and pieces that they'll try to sneak into this legislation or sneak into that legislation. And it doesn't just take strength. It takes a little bit of smarts. And let me give you a quick example about how sometimes you can beat them at their own game, okay? Years ago, I created a policy when I was a county official. We've done something similar in the state. I created a policy that allowed for a longer curing period time for our ballot by mail signatures, because the law was totally ambiguous on it. And so I went and established a written policy for our county 4 or 5 weeks ahead of the election. We did a boring little press release. We posted it online. That's what we're going to do. Didn't put it out there to the world. We just kind of did it. We had this very robust curing session after that particular election. And a lot of people got their ballots counted because we sort of extended what was something that you could do, but we made it mandatory for ourselves. Then what we did was we went and grabbed a bunch of Republican lobbyists and a Republican legislator who thought she knew a bunch about elections, and we got her to run that as a Republican bill to make it the law. We didn't tell the Democrats. And so the Republicans got up on this, and some of my representatives in the state house and legislature, they're like, what's going on? And I said, just go with it. Don't worry about it. This is fine. And we didn't make a big deal out of it. And it ended up becoming a law, not just a policy in one county. And so it isn't, you know, that back and forth letter writing sort of pen pal job that you've got going with Prosecutor Barbie up at the DOJ. That sort of stuff, my campaign told me to stop saying that, but I'm not going to. It's so good. Yeah, thanks. I can tell you right now, without having read the responses either from Michigan or from Oregon, because we had that same sort of back and forth, what we're sending back is really smart. It's not just strong, but it's smart. So at all levels, you've got to have the full package. You've got to have folks that are willing to stand up, that have the backbone and the spine, that have that strength of character, but are also willing to not just be smart themselves, but have smart people around them to do these things. So it is incredibly important in these particular spots because those letters, right, are the record that is going to show what ends up happening when there's a congressional investigation, when there's some sort of other sort of inquiry. The back and forth is super important. And it's not just that upfront fun name-calling sportsman political stuff that we do, but it's also critical on that end. And I will say this, just to dovetail a little bit on what Secretary Benson said, because I think it's important. And a lot of people don't understand this. I know there's a lot of political wonky folks in here. So the reason that their request is illegal is because it violates the Privacy Act of 1974. Not a lot of people know why the Privacy Act of 1974 exists. It exists because of Watergate. It exists because of the invasion in personal data and information, and the Privacy Act was designed to keep the federal government out of your data so that an authoritarian who was trying to manipulate you through your data couldn't do it. That's why this administration doesn't like it, and that's why they're trying to get around it. So that little tiny bit of background is super important, and I think it's critical that we don't just show strength, but we also show plenty of smarts, and it's the states where it's going to happen. Because whether or not they've flip-flopped completely on states' rights in the 10th Amendment, it's still the law. States still have rights over the federal government in several areas, and we're going to keep fighting like hell to keep it that way.
Thank you. So in 2022, one of the big themes was that democracy was under threat like never before. We'd just gone through the 2020 election denial. We'd gone through an attempted insurrection. The general public sort of woke up to who secretaries of state are and what they do and how elections are administered in a way that we just had not seen previously. And then also in the 2022 cycle, we saw on the Republican side many, many election deniers run for office. And we elected Secretary Fontes, we re-elected Secretary Benson, we elected a number of secretaries in other key battleground states and beyond, and really had a very critical cycle for protecting democracy. And that ensured that we had free and fair elections in 2024. And now, like many people in this room, or like everyone in this room, I was not happy with the result at the top of the ticket, but we know they were free and fair elections. In 2026, democracy is probably, arguably, under threat like never before. And even more so than what we were facing in 2022. But because of the sort of political environment we're currently in, where so many things are happening every day and every week, there is less of focus on protection of democracy and Secretary of State races in the mainstream media than there probably was in 2022. So as an open question to secretaries, I would like to ask, like, what sort of communication tactics and other strategies do you think would be useful in sort of elevating this as a critical issue for not only just what it means in 2026 and our secretaries' elections then, but what it means for 2028 when we'll have our next presidential election and beyond?
You two are on the ballot this year.
So 2026 is the election that's going to put secretaries in place for the next 4 years. All right, and in the United States of America, there are 26 Secretary of State races on the ballot. Now, the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State, or I'll call it DAS, which is what we call it, DAS is working really hard to ensure that we maintain the battleground victories that we had. We're going to focus heavily on, of course, Arizona is a big battleground state. Interestingly, Nevada is, and I laugh because until after the election in 22, I didn't know that Secretary Cisco Aguilar was my cousin. He grew up in Tucson. I grew up in Nogales. It's a small town. Anyway, so Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, who else? I think Colorado's on the ballot. We're going to have Pennsylvania's governor appoints, so that's going to be critically important. Wisconsin. Several battlegrounds across the country are up. Georgia, of course, critically important, and I'm sure if I miss any of them. But here's the deal. Okay, so that's what happens in 26. We pick who wins there. Who's going to be the Secretary of State in all of these states when we have that presidential election in 2028? Who's going to be the Secretary of State through the year of the next census in 2030, before the 2030 November elections? Folks, this is not about the next 4 years. It's about the next 14 years and beyond. This is super important. And when you think about it in that context, let me give you a little bit of a scoop as to why. Notwithstanding all of the voter access and extra stuff, Arizona was poised to get, by most estimates, anywhere between 1 and 2 new congressional seats after the 2020 census, okay? There was a couple of communities down in the southwest corner of the state around Yuma. The Army Yuma Proving Grounds is down there, Marine Corps Air Station, where I served, is down there. Somerton and San Luis. They ended up with something like, and I missaid it last night, I said they had 5 new high schools in those 2 communities in that 10-year period leading up to 2020. 5 new high schools and like 2,500 new homes. And they showed less than a 1% increase in population for that county, which is not among the top 5 populated counties in the state. And that's because nobody worked on the census. There was no effort that was concerted to count all those folks. We had massive growth in Maricopa County, massive growth just south in Pinal County, and going down further into Tucson. We're still one of the fastest growing states in the union. You know how many congressional seats we picked up in the last census? 0. Because the Republicans that were controlling all of these spaces decided that it was better for us not to get any new congressional seats. You know why? Because the Independent Redistricting Commission would have put more Democrats in Congress. These offices are critical to the future of the Republic. And those are the big reasons, obviously all of the small reasons. So that's why I think Secretaries of State are so incredibly important, again, not just in Arizona and Michigan, but across the United States of America in 2026.
I can't add anything to that. That's perfect. Sorry. No apologies.
So, yeah, appointed secretaries are very important as well. Pennsylvania, Maine, Virginia. But so, especially given the room that we are in, I would be remiss if I didn't ask our secretaries how stakeholders, activists, people who care about these upcoming elections, like what can they do to support folks winning these offices? And not just, obviously, like all of your own, which are critical, but other ones throughout the country as well.
So I have one thought on this, and it stems from probably the best part of the job for me so far. One of the geniuses, of course, of our system is that elections are not federal. We've already talked about that. But in a large sense, they're not even state. They're individual counties. In Oregon, we have 36 of them, and Alaska Airlines did not help our plan on Friday. We were going to fly to Medford and go see the Lake County clerk. We didn't make it there. We made it here. But that would have been the 33rd county that I visited. So I'm at 32. Tomorrow we're going to get 33 and 34. And to a person across our entire state, across clerks and counties who are very conservative in some cases, ones that I'm certain voted for President Trump, they are all absolutely committed to doing the right thing, to helping boost and earn voter confidence. And so I think part of the answer to your question is get to know your clerk. Go support that person. Look for opportunities to serve on election boards. I don't even say bipartisan election boards because they're multi-partisan. There are at least 2 people, sometimes more, of different parties who inspect ballots as they come in and make sure that the voter intent is accurately reflected and recorded. Be part of efforts that allow people to come and observe the process. We did a couple of ballot ride-alongs with local television stations leading up to May, where we were filming the steps that happen after your ballot is turned in, so that people feel more confident about what's happening. That's a little bit like knocking on doors in a legislative or a city council race. It's slow, but it is durable, because people who have that experience will be able to speak credibly and from direct experience to people who are otherwise skeptical. So there's a role, even if you're not doing anything else, of just helping people have that accessibility to the process, and giving people the confidence and building that over time.
So I would say two things, one macro, one micro. On a micro level, building off of what Secretary Reed said, show up and volunteer, work in the elections, help verify, cure ballots. You do whatever it is needed to act. Because one of the hopes of those who are trying to dismantle democracy right now is to cause us to disengage, to cause us to step back and say, this is too noisy, this is too hard, and to sort of, to stay home. This is the moment to lean in. And leaning in doesn't just mean voting and getting everyone to vote as well, but signing up for a volunteer to be an election worker, be a poll worker, encourage others to do the same. We recruited 25,000 new election workers in 2020 and in 2022 in Michigan. That's how you can actually show the strength of this community and your devotion to democracy. So that's number one. Number two, do not allow we're in an era of misinformation. Do not allow the noise of social media, which will be fueled by lies and AI-generated attacks on our elections and our election officials. Be the voice of truth in those circles, and also pull people out of the social media piece to in-person dialogues, town halls, conversations, even book clubs, where you can actually talk about democracy and listen to people's concerns and then respond to them, because transparency and engagement is actually our friend in this moment. And then finally, number three, when it comes to actually talking about and framing the moment that we're in, we have to talk granular about the importance of making sure you can vote by mail, how the processes are secure, and being a poll worker, frankly, enables you to talk with some expertise and experience on that. But we also have to talk macro in terms of what's actually going on right now. We are in a battle over the future of our republic. We are in the battle over the future of whether or not the power of the people, that is the foundation of who we are as Americans, will actually continue to rule the day. And we have to talk not just about the specifics and counter the security arguments and the integrity arguments, but also step back and say, let's remember what this battle, this war we're fighting is actually about. There are forces who do not want people's voices to be powerful or heard. And that is what these sort of death by 1,000 cuts attacks on democracy are ultimately trying to generate. Someone running for Secretary of State in Michigan right now is talking about this, framing this, he's military, framing this in terms of like a battle for the future of our nation. And these Secretary of State races, if you're framing them in that way, help elevate them out of sort of the granular pieces, which are very critical, but often a lot of times aren't going to get attention, to when we step back and say, we're in an era of misinformation. Secretaries of State can be the truth tellers. We're in an era of attacks on our democracy, on our census, that are designed to put powerful people in charge and silence the voices of everyone else, and grow income inequality instead of addressing it, demolish the middle class instead of protecting it and growing it. Well, frankly, we as Democrats, we've got to step up in this moment and protect the middle class, protect who we are, and it actually starts with protecting democracy, which is our only guarantee that the voice and the power of the people rules the day.
Absolutely. There's one other incredibly important tactic that I will add to what has been said, which I think yes and of course and yes and of course. There's one subject that I think we forget a little bit just because we're worried so much about the right now, and that is the story of the resilience of American elections. Now think for a moment about what happened on September 12th, 2001 in New York City. They had an election. Think about what happened after Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Katrina, COVID-19, the Spanish flu, the Civil War. When in our history have we ever canceled or suspended an election? Fires, floods, earthquakes, other natural disasters. Americans don't cancel elections. When we get in our conversations with friends across the country, when we're out there on social media celebrating the fact that we just don't cancel elections in America, we are building a narrative that stands against the possibility that some people are floating around for next fall. We are on the offensive against that nonsensical idea that, and you heard him say it the other day, well, if we're at war, we're not going to have an election. Bullshit. We had a civil war, which was, by the way, the first time anybody ever got a ballot in the mail was on Civil War battlefields. Right? And I'm sick and tired of the other side celebrating this faux patriotism and this faux idea that they're so much tougher and better. We're the ones that are trying to protect that legacy of resilience of Americans exercising the single thing that separates us from all of the rest and the rest of the world has wanted to follow us on, and that is that we always have our elections. We exercise that power of the people that Secretary Benson so eloquently speaks to because we have our elections come hell or high water. The post office and rain and sleet and snow, they ain't got shit on election administrators, okay? We're gonna have an election in 26. Talk about it. Talk about that. I mean, the post office is great. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to.
We need them in Oregon.
disparage. Yeah,
Can
we
I-
need them. You guys need them.
So
Everybody
can I
needs
just, I was at the No Kings, was anyone else at No Kings March on Saturday? I was marking in Michigan, and a postal worker actually came up to me and she said, thank you for the work that you do. And she said, they attack us all the time because of these lies around absentee ballots. And so we also have to remember that there are real consequences to this misinformation that we can also defend. The people, the workers who actually try to make sure our post office works, our ballots are counted, especially in a state like this. I think standing with our postal workers and making sure they are supported as well, because they're getting the brunt of attacks, of the election integrity attacks as well.
So I think we have a few minutes to take some questions from all of you. So
No, there's a distinct lack of interest. You want to call on people?
sure, right down here in the red.
On October 9th, it was announced Dominion has been sold to Steve Decker out of Missouri, and it's going to be called Liberty Votes.
Yeah.
What is that your concern for you? Because I do live in Washington, we do have paper ballot, mail-in ballots too, so I'm not as worried. But I know Arizona, you have in-person voting.
Yeah, Maricopa County is a Dominion county. Oh, the
Dom-
question is impact of Dominion being bought out by Decker and the No Ink people. So here's how that transaction ends up working out. There's a company called No Ink. Most of the stuff that they do has to do with voter registration and voter check-in systems. The company has purchased Dominion Voting Systems, which has a lot more to do with the ballots and the tabulation side of the house. So they're basically expanding their operation into these other two things. What I have been told, in spite of the fact that they're changing the name to Liberty Voting or whatever, which is a marketing thing, and I'm fine with that, is that those two companies are going to continue to operate separately. The one thing that I want folks to really understand here and realize is this. Don't get caught up in the idea of conspiracy theories when you don't have all of the information, okay? And I'm not saying this to sound condescending. We don't know, generally speaking, most people don't know how incredibly solid our checks and balances are throughout all of our systems. And not every state does it the same way, okay? But when we're talking about, particularly when we're talking about ballots on paper, which is what ballot by mail is, you have that auditable record, that hard copy that reflects the voter's intent. You
Former
also
Secretary
have-
of State here said you can't hack paper ballots.
You can't hack paper ballots, that's true. You also have other checks and balances, and I'll just rattle off a couple. You've got logic and accuracy tests where all of the machines are going to be sealed after that test and then usually checked afterwards so that the tabulation is known to be true. You've got air gaps in the system so that there's no data going backwards through the flow as it goes from the paper to the tabulator to reporting systems, okay? So I'm not as concerned as a lot of people are, and I know these systems back and forth. I ran the second biggest voting jurisdiction in the country with Dominion as a vendor. We've got checks and balances that go beyond just the vendor, okay? I get your concern. I don't think you're wrong to be concerned about it. What I'm trying to do is say, let's make sure that we all have all of the facts before we take that concern and turn it into something that I just saw. And that is that while in Arizona, Republican confidence in our elections is up 37%, thank you very much, because of some of the things we heard and these ridiculous rumors about the Harris campaign and how she got cheated, among Democrats, confidence in elections is down 16 points. We don't want to become them, okay? So, again, I respect your concerns, but I want to put the kibosh on this. Until we have all of the facts and know exactly how it's going to work out, I say give them a little bit of grace, and the proof's in the pudding. We'll see what happens.
Look to see who's on the board. We need to gather more data. I think 'cause we're asking questions too.
Okay, the woman in the Oregon sweatshirt.
Come on, in this town? Are you kidding?
To be clear, it's not U of O and it's not Oregon State. It's just Oregon. This is a question for all three of y'all. If you could wave a magic wand and fix just one, only one, barrier to voter participation or election administration, what would it be?
Donald Trump would start telling the truth.
Wow, hard to improve on that.
I mean, the tendency for us to not feel powerful. I mean, if every single citizen could realize, no matter how much income they make or what their title is or their age or where they live, the power they have. If every person voted because they knew their power of their voice and believed that exercising that power through the vote could change and improve their lives, then everyone would vote. And there's policies, election day registration, modernizing how we, automatic voter registration, vote by mail, early voting. We've got them all in Michigan. It's true, they all do drive up turnout. But as I talk to the people who aren't voting, and I visited people in Flint and Detroit and in white rural areas where people aren't voting, it's sometimes a lack of information, but it's oftentimes a view that their voice doesn't matter and that their power isn't powerful. And of course, that's what those who don't want them to vote are banking on. So if I could change something, I would want every single citizen in this country to realize the power of their voice and become informed and engaged in exercising that power in their respective states. I think that would change our world.
It's really hard to improve on either of those answers. I think if people have the experience of voting in an election where the outcome is close, and then they can see a tangible difference as a result, a policy that makes their life easier, that can add to their faith, their confidence about and enthusiasm about voting. We should be really proud of the fact that we're 75% turnout in Oregon, but the contrary to that is there's 25% of people who, despite all our efforts to remove barriers, are still not choosing to vote. So we got to focus on that.
And I'll add transparency of all money in politics, or just get the corporate money out of politics, right? End Citizens United, and I think public financing of elections, although it's difficult to figure out how to get there, we have to get the money out of politics and end the influence of corporate money in our political system.
I think we have time for one last question. The gentleman in the back in the Navy.
That's a hard path, Ariel.
So the power of all citizens being able to select the candidates that they are voting for is one of those powers. In other words, if the parties are the only ones who select the candidates, then I think a lot of citizens don't feel like they have that participation. So in Oregon, we have the motor voter registration, we have non-affiliated voters, we have major and minor parties that are by standards by how many are registered, and we have open primaries. All of these are tools that can open up an election and make it seem like we really care for everyone to be involved. How does this compare to what's going on across the country? Do you have the same kind of reach out to citizens to get them, because we don't necessarily have people all engaged in voting even though we have all these practices to open it up. How does this compare? I think Oregon's is a leader, but I'm not sure, and I think we need to really exercise the flexibility that we have in our system. So I'm just curious about that.
Well, all right, I'll start. So I do think your point is right. It'll be interesting to hear what Secretaries Benson and Fontes have to say about Arizona and Michigan. I think we still have a gap because the largest segment of our electorate does not have a role in selecting candidates, and we have to have a conversation amongst ourselves and with Oregonians about how to invite them in. I don't think that's sustainable over the long run, that large segment is not participating. To say to them, you don't get to participate in the early stage, but now we need you in the latter stage, seems like a less than optimal strategy. So let's learn from Michigan and Arizona here.
Yeah, we have open primaries. Yeah, I think.
Well, we don't have open primaries because the parties choose not to. The parties can open their primaries if they want. Really, the parties run the entire system in Arizona because it was partisans who wrote all the rules. And I think that's nonsense. In 2019, for example, I went up against kind of the old guard in the Arizona State Party, and I said, why don't we let non-affiliated voters vote in our presidential preference election, right? Make those Democratic candidates come get those independent voters and make that campaign accessible to that many more Arizona voters, right? And the party faithful said, no, if you're not a Democrat, you're not helping select our candidates. And I was like, well, that sucks, but okay. And we lost that at the state committee. But we've got a lot of possibilities. I think we could do open primaries. I think we could do a lot of other stuff. In Arizona, a non-affiliated voter can vote in either of the party's primaries, or the party can lock it out. So we've got a lot of flexibility, but again, the parties run the show in Arizona. And there's one super interesting dynamic that I think is really important to watch. And this is just for this next season, and it just happened. In Arizona, there was a big push a couple of years, a year and a half ago, for the No Labels Party to open up and start operating as a state party in Arizona. And they followed the rules, they registered and everything, and a whole bunch of Democrats got mad at me that I certified them. I'm like, well, they followed the law, what am I supposed to do, right? The leader of the Arizona's No Labels Party just changed the name to the Arizona Independent Party. And so the dynamic is going to be very different because now what you have is a no labels national funding infrastructure behind a party that's only going to take like 1,500 signatures to get someone on the statewide general election ballot. So Arizona is poised for a really interesting political battle, and that's as far as candidate access. But we were the first state to have online voter registration. We just in our special election for that congressional district had 92% ballot by mail turnout. We have 27 days of early voting in Arizona, which is in person and by mail. So we've got a lot of stuff that Oregon has and that Michigan has as well.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your wonderful questions, and thank you very much to Oregon Democrats and Secretary Reed for inviting us all here. And I'm going to let the secretaries do some closing remarks, but I would like to flag that we are having a joint fundraiser for these three up here with me from 2 to 4 this afternoon at Worthy Brewing Company in Bend. So please come if you're able. And I also would be remiss if I didn't say that all of these, we're facing so many critical elections next year. And as you've heard, Secretary of State, but also other statewide offices and other state offices. Obviously, Secretary Benson running for governor, and we're incredibly proud of our secretaries running for other offices. The states and also the Secretary of States are really what is going to help be the firewall to whatever happens next year and beyond. So as you're making your donation plans for next year, please strongly consider gifts to some of the folks that you have heard about, even if, they're not to the people in your own state. What we are facing next year is critical, and Secretary Fontes could use your help. Secretary Benson could as well, and many of our other secretaries throughout the country. And so with that, I will say, Secretary Fontes, any closing remarks?
First and foremost, thank you for everything that you do. This is the inside of what keeps Oregon blue, and so give yourselves a big round of applause for making sure that you set the standard. And the last thing I'll close on is this. There's something that we attached ourselves to starting during the presidential campaign in 2008, and I think we've used it, but I think it's time to take it to the next step, and that idea was the idea of hope. But Nick Cave recently, a little bit of a rock and roller with a punk rock edge, added what I thought was missing. He said recently, hope is adversarial. Hope is adversarial. Hope is as against hunger, as against oppression, as against injustice, as against hate, as against discrimination. Hope is adversarial. Hope gives you something to fight for. But you can't just be thoughts and prayers about your hope. You have to take action against the adversary. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but let us attach those extra 2 words to the notion of hope. Put on our big kid pants and go out there and let's kick some ass for our country.
I'm going to add a word, and that's be a warrior. Be a hopeful warrior, purposefully fighting for our future. And know that there are a lot of people out there who are organizing and banking on all of us being so exhausted that we check out, that we give up, that we stop fighting for democracy. That's the goal here, to wear us out with all the noise, with all the lawsuits, with all the misinformation, with all the division, with all of the hate. And so in that moment, we have to recognize that our path as warriors is seeing all those who came before us and who fought and who sacrificed and who didn't give up so that we could have a Voting Rights Act, a Civil Rights Act, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. We are the party that brought those things to the people of this nation. And we must now again be that party, a party that gets things done, a party that doesn't cower, a party that is courageous, a party that moves with a vision, but moves with a people-driven passion to recognize that the eyes of all those who came before us, who fought for all those things, their eyes are on us now, as people and as leaders, saying, what are you going to do in this moment? How will you light our way out of this time? And I believe the Democratic Party is the light that can light us out, that can take our nation out of this dark time. Only if we as warriors choose to fight with that light for a future that is rooted in equality, in an accessible economy where everyone can thrive, in an education system where everyone has access to the tools that they need to prosper as critical, creative innovators into the future, and where above all, we're seeing each other, we're building community, we're caring for each other, and we're recognizing that not only the eyes of those who came before us are on us now, but the eyes of our future, the young men and women, the boys and girls, who will inherit what we leave behind. They are looking to us now to act and protect them. And that's what all of us have to do in this moment and in the years ahead.
So when I decided to run for Secretary of State, I was excited about the opportunity and the responsibilities and the ways we can try to make Oregon a better state. I did not know exactly what I would be walking into in the bigger picture. But I'm really excited about where we are now, too, because amidst all of this adversity, it's a chance for us to really clarify what we're about and what matters, and renew and refresh and reinforce all of these things. And there are moments in this battle right now that are challenging and can feel really lonely. But I just want to say that being here with all of you gives me renewed energy and encouragement. And I think you all got a little taste of the reinforcement and energy I get from my great colleagues here, but this is not enough. So as you finish up, make sure you stop at Worthy Brewing when you head back, because they need your help, and we want to send them home with Oregon's support and a few Oregon dollars, too. Thank you all very much for being here.